Oh, sorry, let me just quickly give you an introduction of all the panelists. Krishna, on my left, is the Vice President and CTO of Hughes in India, and he's been with Hughes and the satellite industry for more than 25 years. Mr. Ashok, on my extreme right, was a former secretary-level civil servant of the Government of India, and in his last posting, he was a member of the Telecom Regulatory Authority of India. Prashant, on my left, is the Senior Sales Director of MEASAT Sales and Marketing Team, and he supports the company with sales and post-sales of MEASAT satellite services as well as the marketing activities for South Asia. Govind, on my right, is the president at the Aniara Communications, where he's involved in the development of small geo satellite and creating business in the sector. So without wasting time, I thought we'll give it an introduction. If Mr. Ashok, if you can help us with giving a brief background from a government perspective about the, how this transponder capacity was planned, was executed, and how was it supposed to be. And then I'll sort of, ask Prashant from the industry side to present what does it look now and what's the picture right now.
Good afternoon. I think we start with a paucity of time, so I will just run through the supply and demand side of the satellite for broadband and broadcast, and round it off with some points about the regulatory tweaks required to ensure optimizing the cost and time overruns in the current system. This country started on TV transmission sometimes in the 60s with black and white TV transmission, which was a terrestrial transmission, carried it in the 80s to the color transmission, and then settled through cable TV to the DTH. The cable TV platform and the DTH are the current two platforms available for the households in the country. The country has somewhere around 270 million households at an average of 5 persons per house. The current number of connections available is around 145 million TV connections, not TV, but this DTH and the cable TV connections, which is divided roughly in the ratio of 60:40 in favor of DTH around 60% and the cable TV around 40%. The Telecom Regulatory Authority mandated some years ago that the entire transmission has to move over from the analog to the digital. And especially in the case of the cable TV, it was insistent that it should come through about 2 years back. The current thing is that it is likely to happen in 31st March, but my personal feeling is that it will not happen before next year. There are around 45 million cable TV connections which have been moved over to the digitization with a conditional access encryption system. And another 18 are waiting, which is likely to be moved over. In the case of the DTH, there are 62 paid DTH and 20 which are free DTH on programs aired by the government Doordarshan, which is the agency under the Information Broadcasting for broadcast. So now, with this background, this gives some sort of a ecosystem in the demand side. In the coming years, the demand will almost double because of a couple of reasons. One, the current penetration of the TV is around 62% in the country, which if it goes even to around 80 or 90, that means from around 145 million connections, if it goes to somewhere around 240, that's a huge increase. In addition, this country is very diverse, 27 languages, different cultures, and each state wants its culture and language to be showcased, and there is a huge demand pending in the Ministry of Information Broadcasting for channels of regional variety. Currently, we have got 899 channels already operating, which none of the players have the capacity to air They are airing between 400 to 500 channels only. Maximum being in that Videocon, I think, which is around 553. But otherwise, this thing will almost double that. That is the second one. One is the penetration, increase in the number of connections itself. Number two, the number of channels. The third thing is the government initiatives of economic development, the socio-economic development, especially in e-education and e-health, wherein a small mobile screen will not do. You require a huge TV screen for actually teaching people, actually showing a surgery in operation and all that. That is the third thing. So with these 3 or 4 aspects, our demand is going to increase double of what it is there. The current demand is met mostly by the foreign satellites. So the supply side will be mainly the hardware is the satellite of 2 flavors, the local and the foreign. The local transponders are around 19, and the foreign is around 57. That is the current position. So what's happening is most of our local satellites are used for governmental purposes. Governmental purpose for dissemination, for security, for safety, for other considerations. As a result of which, very few are available for commercial broadcast purposes. So in this background, what we require is a hardware increase, which means huge number of satellites moving around the world, and a software increase, which is where the regulatory issues come in the picture, to make at least the gestation period between the start of an application and the time when that operator is going to actually start the production or the broadcast, to tweak it to a smaller time frame. These are the 2 situations which will meet the demand. The current position is that our satellite spectrum is in the band C and the band KU. The Q band or the KU band operates in the 10 to 17 gigahertz. The C band operates in 3 to 7 and has the characteristic of the C band using a very large diameter, the antenna. As a result, it's not useful for home transmission. You can't hang it on a ceiling or on any windowsill. What you require is a smaller one, which the Q band can use, and that is around 1.5 feet or 2. That's the one which is the normal thing. Our broadcasters use generally from the studios where the programs are taken in, generally goes up through the C band. It has better propagation characteristics, being in a lower frequency. The downlinking could also be in C band, but and afterwards, again, in case of DTH, it goes in KU band. Meaning that for large usage purposes, the C band is used. And some years back, the government liberalized that through what is known as an open sky policy, meaning that don't come to me and act as a middleman for entering into commercial contracts. So all the C-band transponders which are currently in use, you can straight away go to a foreign. Local will be difficult because it's not available. If it is there, there is no difficulty. And negotiate with them. Come to me only for a technical clearance. One technical clearance in the Ministry of Space, which will work out and tell you that everything is fine. And another clearance from the Department of Telecommunications, the wireless advisor, who is the repository and the main person dealing with every single frequency in the country. So he keeps track of all the frequencies, what the radio frequencies which are used in the country, which is from 3 kilohertz to upwards of 30 gigahertz, slotted worldwide properly, and which is also allocated to various regions. There are 4 or 5 regions in which it is allocated. So that person must know what is happening. So that license, which is known as a wireless operating license, is finally given. Therefore, this is the situation as C-band. There should not be much of a regulatory tweaking in that. The regulatory tweaking comes in the Q band. The KU band is the most popular one. As I said, 60% of the users are already using KU band for the DTH systems. Therefore, the KU band is not yet liberalized. It is under a closed sky policy, meaning that the Department of Space is the nodal agency for it through ISRO and its commercial arm, Antrix. So what happens is anybody who is wanting a transponder in KU band approaches Antrix, applies to Antrix, the Antrix or the ISRO Antrix consolidates it and then enters into a negotiation through any method with the foreign satellite owner, and then comes back to allocate it. The problem is in time overruns. From the start of the application to the negotiations could take anywhere between 2 to 3 years, in which new players will not even find the whole system useful. They may even get out of the business, and old players will find it suddenly one day that their transponder is gone because they don't have it. The second thing is that once they have negotiated, it's for 3 years only. The normal life of a satellite is around 15 years. So this thing is only for 3, which means I have to turn it over 3 times, which is difficult. So that is one important issue. The second thing is our transponder costs are far higher than the international rates. I will not dwell on that because that is not the part of this subject. Suffice to say that it is extremely expensive to go through this system. The reason for that is that 3 years, because any company which deals with a satellite and which owns a satellite and operates a satellite system almost incurs 90% of the cost upfront. The cost of buying the satellite, the cost of launching it, and all the overheads. As a result, they would like to liquidate it the earliest. So they would like clients who take it for the entire 15 thing and preferably the entire satellite, which will give them the advantage. So that is the main thing. Therefore, with these 3 or 4 points, the regulatory mechanism requires to be tweaked, perhaps towards an open sky policy in the case of this. Coming to the broadcast. In the case of a broadcast, the rural and remote areas will benefit enormously using the satellite communications. In the TRA, there is a paper given by the Broadcast Forum of India that they will be able to get the satellite bandwidth at almost the same cost as the fiber, which is the current preferred medium. There are 2 advantages in going in for the satellite for broadband. A, it augments the capacity of the data route, and B, it acts as a standby or a backup, and especially a backup which is not on Earth, much prone to riots, inclement weather, digging up the things. The fiber gets cut in many places. A satellite communication will be free of all these things. With this thing, the only point I want to mention in broadcasting is this. The regulatory mechanism requires tweaking because Ministry of Information Broadcasting, a license, Ministry of Space, a no objection certificate, and the moment you enter into broadband, it is the territory of Department of Telecommunication, you require a separate license. Therefore, that complexity will have to be eased out. I think I will stop at this thing.
Okay. No, thank you. I think this is a good background. I just wanted to augment the fact that the gap between demand and supply in the transponder capacity, as Mr. Ashok said, is 2x. It's actually going up even faster because of the fact that many HT channels are coming in. The second is that the planned capacity by ISRO has failed many times, as a result of which the gap has further, gone up. and we still don't have any disaster recovery capacity. So if any one satellite fails, your channels go out. So the gap which has been there between the demand and supply has been growing stupendously. And as Mr. Ashok said, it's very, very severe and very threatening in the KU band space, more so than compared to the C band space. So just want to give a perspective. Krishna, if you can come in and provide your perspective, and I'll come to you, Prashant. From a foreign satellite operators and a private satellite operators perspective, what is the hardships and what's the situation there that's happening?
Thanks, Smita, and she's really kept me on a tight leash in terms of time, so I'll be quick. So I'm going to give a very different perspective, more a service provider perspective. We are the largest service provider in the country and the largest service provider in the Asia-Pacific region in terms of satellite over, broadband over satellite. So our view is a bit different from what's been spoken here. First of all, the way we sell capacity or the way we sell services is very different. We go to the state-owned PTT, which is BSNL in India. We look at what are all the connections that they are refusing to their customers. So we take out that list, and those are our golden customers we go to. Because once BSNL can't service those customers, those are the customers who are going to be serviced by satellite. That's a reality today. That's what can really change. There's a lot of advancements which are happening in the satellite industry worldwide. There are big players like Google and others who are entering this space. There is tremendous amount of efforts put in by a lot of companies in bringing the cost of satellite more affordable. So once that happens, somebody said it's, this was a statement by Eutelsat, which said that it is going to take, 10 to 20 times, it's going to be 10 to 20 times more expensive to connect the last 10 to 20% of the economy or the population. So satellite definitely has a big role to play, but at the same time today, 37% of the entire industry is commercial in nature, rest of it is strategic. And most of the governments have opened this 37%, so that's what is being really talked about. It's a large industry. The satellite broadband and industry itself is about $125 billion industry. It's growing at a good pace. As I said, a lot of new things are coming up. The ISRO chairman has recently gone on record saying that 50% of capacity, which is what is being talked about. But I also beg to differ on one point that fundamentally I think the problem is coming more from the people who are there is a major conflict of interest in terms of the person who's supposed to regulate is also a service provider who's also accountable for selling capacity. So that's one fundamental issue, which needs to be dealt with, because it can't be. And by the way, I wouldn't really agree with the point that the Indian capacity is not cheap. It's we did an analysis today with all the ground segment costs included. For me to deliver a 1 megabit of capacity to an Indian customer on a INSAT satellite or a GSAT satellite, which is owned by the government, it's about $12,000 per Mbps per annum. On any comparable foreign satellite, with KU band capacity, this goes to about $15,000 per megabits per annum. Now, so that's not the real point. I think the real point is not about $12,000 to $15,000. What's really happened is the advent of Ka band, which is the new band, has allowed various satellite operators to multiply this in the spectrum into as many as 4 to 5 times. So essentially what has happened is today there are, we just launched a satellite over the United States, which is 220 gigabits of capacity. We are able to deliver 1 gigabits of capacity per terminal, to anywhere in the United States. So that's really made possible only by this Ka band, and thanks to NSR, for coining this term high throughput satellites. So the high throughput satellites and Ka band is a combination, which is really making things possible. So I continued the same analysis on, the high throughput satellites as well. There is one of the high throughput satellites which have been recently launched by an operator over India. So with that, the same cost per megabit comes down to $4,200 to be specific per megabits. So from $15,000 on a conventional satellite to $4,000 on a high throughput satellite. So, and if it is a full-fledged Ka band high throughput satellite, it will come down to $1,500 per megabits per annum. So you can see from $1,500 to $15,000 is 10 times. So if there is a 10 times reduction in the cost, input cost, that would definitely help proliferate broadband in a much better way and help us reach the masses very much. I think what we've been really, so one of the issues which I dealt with earlier is in trying to, ISRO trying to sell its own capacity, I think it's high time, there was some policy initiative which was made to separate out Antrix as a commercial organization and ISRO more focusing on research, etc. But I think that's not fully fructified. I would say that a lot of capacity which is built up by ISRO has to be completely transferred as assets to Antrix, and Antrix has to execute these agreements because ISRO is too bogged down by today, I don't think anybody is really accountable more to how much of capacity is sold, but who it is sold and how it is sold is what is coming in the limelight. One mistake, which is made in who it's sold or how it is sold, people are being hauled up, and that's not right. So Antrix, being a commercial organization, should be able to, freely sell capacity to anybody who wants it, without going through the scrutiny, and that would be fair on ISRO. The second aspect is on open skies. I would say that once you make it as a commercial sale, I as a service provider should be able to buy capacity wherever it is cheaper from. And if the capacity which I've shown in my analysis, if the INSAT satellite is cheaper, we'll automatically buy from INSAT. I mean, there's no need for the government to really worry about whether the INSAT capacity is cheaper or will the INSAT capacity lie idle and will we all go to a foreign satellite? That question just doesn't arise with the kind of pricing and the costing which ISRO has really, achieved. Now, the other aspect, really I want to highlight, which is the last aspect, is, private participation. I think private participation in the Indian space program, and especially in the commercial SATCOM, is very, very important. We have, as a company, we've applied for, launching our own satellite. Mind you, a lot of what the Digital India is trying to achieve, our assessment about, the government's assessment is about 3,000 sites can be connected by satellite. I think it's grossly wrong. It's about more than 10 times of that. It's at least 30 to 40,000, sites which can be really connected by satellite. What we are saying is we don't, what we truly believe, we've seen this in the rest of the countries, any subsidy-based model is not something which is sustainable, right? I mean, so you can't run out of government subsidy for a very, very long time. What we are precisely asking the government is we are willing to put a $500 million investment to put a space asset over India and monetize it, allow us to do that. If we do a job, if we do that job well, we are the gain. If you, if you do a bad job, it's our $500 million which is down the drain. So all we are asking for permission, we are very hopeful that the government takes note of it and allows us to do that, because that will really get the cost that which I'm talking about in terms of 1 to 15 ratio. That's what will really hit it when it comes to broadband for India. Thank you.
Thanks, Krishna. I think that's very useful. I want to now bring in Prashant, and Prashant actually represents, he's actually the sales and marketing director for South Asia as a foreign satellite operator. Can you share your experience in how smooth is working in India, working with Indian clients, and what has been your experience in dealing with ISRO, Antrix, etc.? If you can share a light on that.
Sure. So just as a matter of introduction, MEASAT is a satellite operator based in Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia, and that's where we are headquartered. That's where our NOC, our teleport, is located. And we have been in operation for the last 25 years, putting up satellites. We currently have a fleet of 6 satellites that cover all the way from Australia to West Africa. As far as India is concerned, we've now been doing business in India in some form or the other, in either C or KU band, for the last 20 years. So out of the 25 years we've been in existence, we have had some business coming from India for about 20 years now. And while the points that were brought up both by Mr. Ashok and by Krishna, who are both veterans as far as this industry is concerned, I think despite the challenges, it's not that foreign satellite operators have not been able to do business. What does that indicate? It basically indicates that the market and the demand is such that there is room for people to get business one way or the other. I'll draw a parallel to the telecom industry, which recently has gone through its own upheavals. I mean, give or take, we had about 8 or 10 telcos, either small ones or national ones, that were operating in the cellular space. And still there is place for a Geo to come in, kind of disrupt the market, cause consolidation to come onto the table for the bigger guys, and clearly indicate that people want data, people want video services, people want voice and you know, all the good things that come with connectivity. The same applies to the broadcasting and DTH sectors as well. We are not here as a satellite operator to replace Indian domestic capacity on the INSAT fleet. We are here to augment it. What we are saying is there is sufficient demand, and like Mr. Ashok rightly said, if the regulations make it more conducive, that doesn't mean that there is going to be an existential threat for the INSAT capacity. It simply means that both INSAT and foreign satellites will have, in a way, a level playing field. And frankly, I mean, I'll backtrack a bit. The demand is visible in front of us. Today, you know, I believe the latest figures are somewhere to the order of 180 million television households. The DTH operators, despite the fact that you know, there's been staggering growth owing to digitization, and there is consolidation happening between the two large Dish and Videocon. But despite that, if you look at Free Dish, which is the offering from the public broadcaster, they've grown to 20, 30, 40 million numbers themselves, which means that even though the paid DTH guys have a certain strategy, there is enough demand for the free DTH. What does that mean for the satellite operators? It means that where there is capacity available, it will get consumed. This contradiction in some ways is very classical of India, right? I believe it was economist Joan Robinson who said that you know, whatever you believe about India to be true, the converse of that is also true. And you can find some of the other example to justify both sides of the table. I'll just make a couple of more points on the broadcasting side. You have, you know, while the bulk of the channels that are being carried on Indian satellites today are in standard definition, and the bigger players and even now the smaller ones are making investments in high definition, at the same time, the country is leapfrogging to 4K in some ways. Even though it's very, very small and very, very minuscule, that just shows the sheer width and the sheer depth of the market to be able to allow each one to have its own space and support service providers like ourselves, whether we are providing C-band or KU-band capacity. So I think that's the point I would like to make. We are not here to replace, we are here to supplement, and the demand that exists is enough for everyone to fill up their satellites.
No, thank you. I think that's the perspective that I wanted to thank you, Prashant, for that. I just now, Govind, if you can come in, please. You know, recently there's been a tender to invite Indian operators to put up their own satellites, and you know, Govind, your company was also one of those participants. If you can share your experience around that.
Sure. Yeah, I think I just want to make a comment that this is a very interesting subject to all those who provide capacity and to all those who use capacity. So in different forum, we have spoken about this, written about this. So I don't want to deal too much about that. Let me get into the specifics on this. What probably everyone, when I say everyone, it's all the stakeholders, the people who provide capacity, people who use capacity. What they look for is clarity and transparency. Maybe we'll have to look at that, how clarity and transparency can be provided. And planning is also important. Planning by the private satellite operator, planning by the government satellite operator. Then most important things, especially since we have been talking about the commercial use of the capacity, what people do not like is uncertainties. So Let us work in removing those uncertainties, whatever may be there. And also about capacity allocation. There may be capacity available by Indian satellite operator. There may be capacities available with foreign satellite operator. So we will have to work out a mechanism as to see how we can efficiently utilize those capacities. And I will come to that last point, what you want. So maybe just to make a one point on each one of these, probably the government probably can come out with a mechanism to publish the inventory of capacity that is available with them, and also they list out the foreign satellite that are allowed to be used over India. That means whether they are coordinated on things like that, then there will be clarity for people to use what they want. Planning, I know it's easy to say. ISRO, I know very well. They have got excellent planning department at various centers. We could probably see whether we could involve some of the private players also in the planning process to see whether they can take their input live and incorporate to the extent possible. It also provides a little bit more clarity on that. Probably we could also consider establishing an independent body, because we always talk about the demand and requirement, supply and demand. I firmly believe there is always mismatch on both sides. So maybe it is important to establish an independent body who can probably work with all the stakeholders to see whether they can come out with a plan and also properly define the demand and supply requirement, which will in turn assess the planning process of the planning process as a whole. I am also a supporter of India's policy presently, where the users of the capacity are required to use Indian capacities. There is nothing wrong in that. In some cases, they say preference will be given to the Indian satellite capacity. Why should we not use Indian capacity when they are available? And it's also mentioned. Then the question comes whether there are enough capacity available within the Indian satellite system. If not, why not we encourage private companies who are willing to operate their satellite under Indian satellite system by conforming to the regulatory requirements to expeditiously encourage them and give them authorization to operate. So I think with a positive note, I think we have been doing a pretty good job. There is always need to do better. I just, on a positive note, there is always room for all the stakeholders to do better than what we have been doing. Thanks.
Thank you, Govind. No, I think we've come on time, so we brought out the points that we wanted to bring in. So thank you, panelists, for helping me cover this panel in 30 minutes. But just a couple of minutes if there are any questions from the floor. Yeah, go ahead. Can somebody please pass on a mic to him? The gentleman there. Yeah.
My name is Arjun and I'm a lawyer in this space. I just had one question, on both points to the gentleman from Hughes and Mr. Govind. First is that we've already had a long-standing policy on Indian satellite space participation, but it's never fructified. Other than the conflict of interest point that was pointed out, are there any other reasons that people think that may be the reason behind this? The second is that you pointed that there's a system of preference, but there's never been clear articulation of what that preference means, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's a policy that is there in the broadest term. It says that, but in the absence of clarity on how that preference translates, there's never going to be an incentive for somebody to make, say, a $500 million investment on an assumption that there might be a preference, as opposed to a clear guideline on what that preference translates into business terms.
Go ahead.
Yeah, there is a policy that exists on putting up an Indian satellite system. It's been in existence for a very long time, since '97. Further, it was revised in 2000. But I think what I mean, it's a great policy, but as true with any policy which is initially formulated, there's a lot of open ends, there's a lot of subjectivity. The policy needs to be constantly, revised, as we learn, because we're all learning. It's, this is the first time, a parallel would be that the Telegraphic Act, when it was enacted and till now, there's been so many changes which have happened, and how, the exclusive privilege of the government is given to people, how are licensing done, where it should be licensed, where it should not be licensed. So I think the consultative process which the Telecom Ministry has adopted more through the TRAI, that's been a wonderful job. I think that is how the the various NTPs came out, the telecom policies, and so definitely on the cellular side we have leapfrogged. A similar thing has to happen on the satellite side. The policy is a little outdated today, and I wouldn't say entirely irrelevant, but definitely outdated. A lot of things are left to subjectivity. That should be removed. And as Govind rightly pointed out, a lot of transparency needs to come in. More time, definition has to also come in. That if I make an application, when will I hear from the government that whether it's approved or not approved? So that needs to be defined. I think once all this is rightly done, definitely, I think the mood is definitely right today. The government has, and ISRO so much has recognized that private participation is important. I think that's a big step. Having a policy is one thing, but the government really, truly in spirit, feeling that it needs private participation. I think it's the right time that the policy, can be revised, to address all these issues.
Can we take a couple of? Yeah, okay.
Hi, this is Ramesh. This question to Krishna, one, and then to everybody else here. Krishna, what's more challenging for you, as a MEASAT operator, getting customers in or getting the capacity? That's one thing that I wanted to ask you. And the second is to just about everybody here, is it really true that there is a capacity crunch? If you get to speak to the ones who decide who gets the capacity, they tell a different story. They say that probably it's more of somebody wanting to hoard capacity, or the capacity need doesn't really exist. If we put out a statement to every possible user, they're not willing to commit that capacity.
Yeah.
So this is kind of very confusing as to what's the real situation. Is that a hyped up thing that India needs tons and tons of transponders, or is it that somebody wants to talk about it, or some kind of unsurety on that? Thanks.
Yeah, and then we can close. Yes, sir. May I have your question, and then we can close this.
I appreciate all the speakers. There are many, many relevant points and learnings out of long experience we have gone through in this field. I think one aspect which has not come out in this discussion is what is the real limit to the capacity? See, the spectrum is a limited natural resource.
Okay.
Even if we allow freely, Indian as well as foreign capacity, are there limits, and how does it compare with the demand scenario? This is something I think needs to be done clearly, and it is to be projected. I think the second point is very importantly, in view of the limitations of each band after a certain period, we need to look for better and better technologies. So there is no other way than looking for other bands, other techniques, and so on. So what Krishna said about use of Ka band, and bringing in capacities for Ka band is very important, and we should look at the potential of internet applications, high-speed internet applications. That is a very, very important aspect that should be looked at. The other couple of points I want to share is, I think we should move to the regime of price and quality combined based competition system, and there should be independence of a regulatory mechanism. If we can implement these things, I think we can encourage the industry very well.
Absolutely.
I would like to add,
Sorry,
only last,
yeah,
I'm
yeah.
Mitra from I2APT. So Mr. Ashok, what you said about the C-band. In India, I think the frequency, we have got a extended C-band also. So that I just wanted
yeah,
to
of course.
mention. Thank
So, Ashok, I'll just quickly, if you can respond to that, and then we'll leave. Both. Okay. Okay. What's the real problem?
I think the real problem is, real challenge is, I mean, it changes almost every year, I would say. First, it's hard to get the customer, then when you get the customer, you don't have the capacity. So it's both are definitely a problem. And the first problem is true for any satellite service provider. That's what, my opening statement was, it's always, what is left over from terrestrial is what we get today. And that is because the cost of satellite is high. And that's where, Mr. Sridhar Murthy's remark is very important, that new technologies and new bands will change that equation. We will be able to head-on compete against terrestrial, which we are doing in some of the markets where we are already present and we are already operating in those bands. Having said that, the Indian demographics is also is very different. I don't think in our demographic situation we don't have those consumers who would want to pay more to get a broadband service in their homes. Today, if I go to a consumer doesn't have option of a terrestrial, he doesn't take a satellite because the satellite option is much more expensive, and he or she can't afford that kind of a thing. So I think the real consumer for satellite in India is more the cell phone, which means cellular backhaul is a very important application, because for cell phone coverage to reach in those remote areas, it needs a backhaul mechanism which can be effectively provided by satellite. So that's a real consumer for satellite. And the second is community kiosks which can offer broadband to the consumers. So that's a second important application. So these are the applications which are really important. Coming to your second question, is there a real shortage, or is there a yes, if you really see, as per the records today, which is always being thrown at us, that how many applications are pending, there's none. Right? That's a truth. But look at it, that if it takes 3 years to get capacity from from the government, and why would I keep piling up more and more demands when my first demand itself is not met? So it's a different picture. So you'll have to look at it in that perspective. That if I put an application and my application doesn't get serviced in 3 years, will I keep piling up applications every 3 months? And so the demand is huge? That's the answer.
Yeah, I fully agree with what Dr. Sridhar Murthy mentioned. In fact, I had made that point also about the different spectrum, that is frequencies which we should look at. This is where I mentioned that when we have an independent body who could probably look at the planning, they will always look at the various aspects that include the availability and provisioning of spectrum in many aspects. Yesterday we heard from Astrum Technology as to how they are working innovatively on the new technology, which could probably not only bring down the cost tremendously, and also probably do not bother about the coordination aspect because of the type of spectrum that they are using.
I'm sorry, we're running really short of time.
Sure.
Yeah,
Yes, there is an extended C-band lower and extended C-band higher, and there is a C-band 3.75 to 4.25. That will be the lower 1.5. Then there is one for 0.3, and then another one for 0.5. You are right. That the entire thing is the C-band. That's the one. Second thing, 2 issues. Technological invention with these upgradations in terms of cloud computing, Internet of Things. That is the demand side. On the other side, as he said, normal definition, which is the SD, standard definition, high definition, and the ultra high definition. All these things require, as you go up the quality ladder, then you require more and more bits pushed into that, which means I am pushing a lot of things through that same tube. It will get crowded. Therefore, I require to push it faster. and through a wider space. Faster means newer technologies for pushing it faster. Wider, I require a bandwidth. So that's where your question comes, wider spectrum. So therefore, C, yes, KU is more or less getting into problems, because this data, when I am pushing it, notwithstanding the AMPEG-2 becoming AMPEG-4, which means the compression techniques are also becoming better. AMPEG-4 will be able to take twice the load of AMPEG-2. Therefore, in that thing, the newer thing is the Ka band. In the 18 to 22 or beyond that also, in that gigahertz range. And the Ka band is not available here because the Department of Space has not cleared it. They are saying that they will do it as soon as one of our satellites goes up with a transponder with Ka band. That is the reason for that. Ka band has got a lot of advantages. It uses an antenna which is only 1 feet. So as the frequencies go up, then your antenna sizes, they come down. So from a 6 feet in C band, you have got only a 2 feet in a Q band, which is the KU band. And when you go to 1800, 2020, 18, 20, 22 and beyond, in that Ka band, which is the current one, this is the thing. Secondly, the Ka band also has an advantage in attenuation because of what you call as rain fading. Because the wavelength in the case of the Q band, the raindrops have the same wavelength more or less as the Q band itself. Therefore, K band has that advantage, but that is a regulatory thing. And most of these issues in the technological upgradation, be it the high definition, being the compression techniques, being the spectrum band, and all these things are already under consideration. The question is the coordination between the Department of Space, the Department of Telecommunication, and the regulator TRI. Thanks.
Yeah, quickly. I mean, I hope no terrestrial people are in this room, because they will, this is not a good point for them. The terrestrial people today fight for 20 megahertz and 30 megahertz of spectrum, right? To answer Dr. Sridharamurthy's question, satellite in the KU band, it is 750 megahertz of spectrum is what we are holding, and multiplied by the number of orbital slots, it's a huge amount of spectrum. When we talk about Ka band, it's 2.5 gigahertz of spectrum, and if you operate in both the polarization, it's 5 gigahertz of spectrum. So spectrum is never the problem. So the spectrum problem can be easily solved. We have plenty of spectrum. I think it's more, once the right policy is in place, satellite will have a very bright future in this country.
Lovely way to thank you so much for your patient hearing, and I'm sorry to eat up your lunchtime. But thank you, panelists, for accommodating such a big session into Sol. Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you.